Welcome back to the channel. So 16,000 odd of you voted on a community poll that I did just recently, so thank you to everyone that voted, after I discovered a headline that I felt might be slightly misleading and ironically might stir up hate within the sector that they are trying to eliminate. So the headline read, "Scientists call for the terms male and female to be phased out amid a crackdown on harmful language." I asked you in the community post, is that really harmful language, as a completely neutral and objective question. I also said comment below why and why not. Now 98% of 16,000 of you voted no, it's not harmful language. But in this video I'm going to discuss what I think is the real motive behind this headline, to try to bring some sense to this conversation with a little bit of legal application. So bear with me. Before we go any further, if you enjoy my content, please do hit the subscribe button. I'm a barrister who helps you to understand law. I've been doing it for a long time now. It's a bit of a mission of mine to reach 1 million subscribers to help you understand law. I started in the lockdown with COVID because lots of people had difficulties. Sometimes the courts just sent out an order to say, we don't have capacity, sort it out yourselves. No kidding, that was genuinely an order I got from the court. It said, we don't have the capacity to hear this case. We suggest that they discuss it and resolve it between themselves. So I took it upon myself to create this channel to help you to understand law, but yet still 60% of you that watch are not subscribed. So please hit that subscribe button to help me reach 1 million subscribers as my goal to help 1 million people understand law. So on with the video. So I looked into the origin of this headline, this scientists call for the crackdown on what they call harmful language. It turns out it was a language project called the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology Language Project. Ostensibly, it called for input from the scientific community as to what terms they might consider harmful, why, and what replacement terms they should use instead. Now, I'm no scientist, but it would seem to me that if you ask for something, you're going to receive it. If I asked any of you for what you think is a harmful term, I'm sure I'd get thousands of responses as to what you think is a harmful term. And so in this video, I thought I would take that headline and the motive and the idea behind it and try to make some kind of sense about it. Because, of course, there are lots of different arguments and debates on social media, in the news, and in society in general. But I'd also like to give you some guidance from a legal perspective to avoid getting caught up in any kind of serious trouble. In this video, I'm going to focus on what might amount to a hate crime, which I think is very far apart from the broad declaration that the terms male and female should be phased out because they're harmful language. So let's talk about the definition of a hate crime, what could be a hate crime, and how that relates to language. Now, a hate crime is defined as any criminal offence which is perceived by the victim or another person, so could be somebody else watching, to be motivated by hostility or prejudice based on a number of protected characteristics. So in full, that could mean that the hostility or prejudice could be based on a person's disability or perceived disability, their race or their perceived race, religion or perceived religion, sexual orientation or perceived sexual orientation, or transgender identity or perceived transgender identity. So let's talk about the key words in that definition. Firstly, any criminal offence. So we must be starting out with some kind of criminal offence. So I'll park that for a moment. I'll come back to that just in a moment. So any criminal offence that is motivated by hostility or motivated by prejudice, based on any of those protected characteristics. Now, if I were to give you a very broad example, if someone were to come along to your garage door and spray paint the word scum as a generic slur against you, now, obviously, that's criminal damage, but is it a hate crime? Well, that depends on whether it is perceived to be by you, the victim, or anybody else that reads it, that it is based on hostility or prejudice based on any one of those protected characteristics. If it's just because you borrowed money and didn't return it, that's not a protected characteristic. If they spray painted scum on your garage door because they don't like you, yes, it's criminal damage. Yes, it could amount to harassment if it was conduct on at least 2 occasions that would cause a person of reasonable firmness alarm and distress. And that could be one of those events that could amount to harassment. At the very least, it's criminal damage. But is it a hate crime? Well, that's when the police would look behind the offence to see what was the motivation. Now let's say instead it wasn't because you borrowed money and didn't return it. Let's say you were disabled, and then let's say that the perpetrator that sprayed this on the garage door also did it on someone else's garage door who was also disabled, and then someone else's garage door around the corner who was also disabled. Then the police have a pattern of criminal offences which quite clearly appear to be targeting disabled persons. That is then quite clearly a criminal offence of criminal damage and potentially harassment, which appears to be motivated by hostility and or prejudice against those who are disabled. Now, if you were to insert any other protected characteristic into that scenario, if the person with the spray paint were committing those offences because it was motivated by hostility or prejudice based on any one of those protected characteristics, then you would expect it to be prosecuted as a hate crime. And then you would probably agree with me that that's absolutely right, because not only was it a criminal offence, but it's made worse because it's targeting a particular individual with a protected characteristic. A brief aside about protected characteristics. These come into play in a number of different scenarios. Now, ordinarily, members of the public are not required to make reasonable adjustments for somebody else who has a protected characteristic, although it might be expected in certain situations to be courteous and so on, whereas companies and public bodies are, of course, required to make reasonable adjustments to cater for those that have protected characteristics. There are also various laws about discrimination, where it is unlawful to discriminate against somebody, i.e. treat them less favourably because they have a protected characteristic, any one of the number of things that I've mentioned. It's also important to mention that any one of these protected characteristics may be engaged for the purposes of discrimination or hate crime at the same time. So, for example, it could be because somebody is female and disabled, or male and disabled, or any one of a combination of the other protected characteristics. If the crime itself is motivated out of hostility or prejudice against any one or a combination of those protected characteristics, then it will be prosecuted as a hate crime. That's important because the courts have various legislative powers to impose a much harsher sentence on any offence if it is successfully prosecuted as a hate crime. For example, a year or so ago, Yusuf Rawish was sentenced to an 18-month community order for transphobic hate crime for a barrage of slurs, including intentionally misgendering the victim. Now, this is where we come back to language and whether language is harmful. Although 98% of the 16-odd thousand of you that voted in the poll said the terms male and female are not harmful language, it does depend on how they are used. For example, let's say you have a lady who looks particularly masculine, or you have a man who looks particularly feminine. There would clearly be a material difference in a one-off event of mistakenly referring to either of them as the wrong gender, as to somebody following them down the street, deliberately calling them the wrong gender, knowing that it's going to cause them alarm and distress. Clearly, one is a mistake, and the other one is intentional harassment. Equally, if a person were to mistakenly refer to a Chinese person as being Japanese in an attempt to build rapport, that might cause offence, but it wasn't deliberate. On the other hand, if they were to deliberately refer to them as a different nationality, with the intention of causing alarm and distress, you can clearly see the difference. So really, the purpose of this video is not to tell you what to think and what to do. It's really to just shed some objective reasoning and analysis to the conversation. But also, if you do hold particular views and you intentionally cause somebody alarm and distress, motivated out of hostility or prejudice based on any of those views which are protected characteristics, it might well be prosecuted as a hate crime, which in most cases is going to be far more serious. So as always, let me know your thoughts and comments in the box below. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.